Welcome to a new Stories Online course on energy storage legislation across Europe. I'm Jacopo Tosoni and I am Head of Policy at EASE. EASE is the European Association for Storage of Energy. I'm joined today by Carolina Cruz.
Carolina here, and I'm a junior policy officer at EASE.
As you can see in the agenda, we're gonna first touch upon what is energy storage. So, the basics. Secondly, we're gonna discuss European Union energy policy. Thirdly, we're gonna touch upon European Union energy storage policy. And finally, we're gonna touch upon European Union policy vis-à-vis the European Union member states. So how policy making is intertwined.
But what is energy storage? At EASE, we follow the Clean Energy Package definition, which enshrines that energy storage is deferring the final use of electricity to another moment later in time than when it was generated, or the conversion of electrical energy into a form of energy which can be stored, the storing of energy and subsequent reconversion of such energy into electrical energy or use as another energy carrier. This may take the form of power to X to power or power to X. We have identified 5 energy storage families which encompass different technologies, mainly chemical, electrical, electrochemical, mechanical, and thermal. These may have different forms of applications, mainly generation support services, bulk storage services, services to support transmission infrastructure, ancillary services, services providing customer energy management, or services to support distribution infrastructure. By looking at this graph, we can see that different technologies can provide different services at different time frames.
Energy storage facilities can also be analyzed by looking at where they are deployed. You can say that they're deployed front of the meter, at commercial and industrial level, or at residential level. These 3 segments change very much one from the other in terms of market uptake, type of energy storage being installed, and of course also potential. But let's talk now about the European Union energy policy. Historically, the energy system and its policy framework was dominated by state intervention, monopolies, and vertically integrated entities. More about this in the next slides. In the 80s and 90s, we can witness the age of liberalization, which also touches upon the energy sector. This has led to drastic changes, but in the past few years, we also see an awareness of the need of public policy to act when the invisible hand can't reach or it is slow to arrive. In the past, as we were saying, a vertically integrated utility was taking care of generation, transmission, distribution, and retail, and engaging directly with customers. After the liberalization, we see that there are some liberalized markets, but also some natural monopolies which are regulated. As you can guess, in a liberalized market and in a natural monopoly which is regulated, legislating on energy storage can be particularly complicated. It is also worth discussing how European laws come to be. Relevant institutions worth mentioning are several. Let's start with the European Council. It unites the 27 heads of state and government. It provides impulse to the broad guidelines of the European Union. These guidelines are received by the European Commission, which is composed by 27 commissioners. The Commission proposes the budget and the European laws. The European Parliament, which is composed by 720 members of the European Parliament, and the European Council, which are the 27 ministers of the different member states, vote on these European laws after having discussed them at the institutional level and in dialogues, which are engagement between the different institutions. That means that at different moments of the discussion, both the national perspective and the European Union perspective are taken into account. When the European Union legislates, it relies on different types of legislation. First, directives, which are a legislative act that set the goals the European Union countries must achieve. It is up to the individual countries to devise their own laws and how to reach these goals. Secondly, there are regulations, which are binding legislative acts. They must be applied in their entirety across the EU. Finally, we have decisions, which are binding on those to whom they are addressed. For example, a EU country or an individual company. They are directly applicable. That means that European legislation is composed by both binding and non-binding types of laws. As we will see in later slide, when the member states receive, for example, directives and implement them into national law by enshrining them, not everything goes according to plan. There may be a mismatch between the national implementation and the original vision at the EU level, or there could be significant delays in this implementation. But what is the role of energy markets according to the European Union? What are the objectives of the European Union in the energy sector? As you imagine, as time passes, these objectives change. But what has been presented here in this slide is what has been set up by the European Union back in 2015 and still considered cornerstone of the European Union legislative activity. First, the European Union aims at diversifying Europe's sources of energy, ensuring energy security through solidarity and cooperation between EU countries. Secondly, it is key to ensure the functioning of a fully integrated internal energy market, enabling the free flow of energy through the EU through adequate infrastructure and without technical or regulatory barriers. It is also important to improve energy efficiency and reduce dependence on energy inputs, cut emissions, and drive jobs and growth. It's paramount to decarbonize the economy and move towards a low-carbon economy in line with the Paris Agreement. Finally, it is key to promote research in low-carbon and clean energy technologies, prioritize research and innovation to drive the energy transition and improve competitiveness. Again, these are very general provisions that may change with time. Objectives change with time. Different legislative initiatives, different legislative packages have had much more specific objective and much more dramatic impact on the European Union energy market. Let's talk for a moment about energy storage policy in the context of the European Union. What legislation will we talk about? We can start from the Clean Energy Package from 2019. 2019 is the year it was finally approved. Why do we start here? because it sets the foundation for energy storage legislation, starting with a definition. So really the basics. But it also contains several other provisions that greatly transformed and improved the energy market and the energy storage role in it. It is also worth discussing Fit for 55, presented in 2021, which is a gigantic package elaborated in the context of the European Green Deal and the related effort to achieve decarbonization. It is also worth discussing REPowerEU, which was elaborated in the context of the energy crisis, triggered by the gas price spikes and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And again, the date refers to the year it was presented, 2022. Finally, we cannot forget the electricity market design revision from 2024. This time it is the year it was approved. Simply put, it dramatically reforms the market rules and envisions a much bigger role for energy storage and pushes policymakers at the national level to fully recognize energy storage and flexibility role in that future energy system and current one. Okay, starting with the clean energy package. It includes 8 legislative texts. The general goal is carbon neutrality by 2050. The measures included tackle energy performance in the buildings, renewable energy, energy efficiency, the governance, the risk preparedness, the introduction of a new European regulator, the electricity sector, through, as you see, directives and regulations. So a wide array of topics. Not all these pieces of legislation are relevant to energy storage. You can see here the ones that are clearly mentioning energy storage and clearly had a direct impact on energy storage. What is important to remember is that, again, this was really setting the base for an energy storage sector working in the context of a market and a liberalized market. The clean energy package is also relevant as it tackles energy storage across all the different segments. So front of the meter, residential storage, and commercial and industrial storage. So looking at front of the meter, we can start by talking about ownership rules. Who owns energy storage? Who can own energy storage? So distribution system operators and transmission system operators cannot generally own or operate storage unless that is approved by regulators. Such storage cannot participate in the markets now. So there are exceptions to the rule, but they're very specific. Distribution system operators must act as neutral facilitators, while transmission system operators shall ensure efficient storage integration and consider it in network plans. Procurement-wise, market-based tendering needs to happen for flexibility services, including storage. This is mandatory. If we look at the behind the meter segment, so residential segment, but also commercial industrial, active customers are defined. These are individuals who can store and sell electricity, and they have defined rights. There are also energy communities, which are groups that can co-invest in energy storage, and they have the same rights as individuals. Looking at buildings, there are smart buildings, and there must be smart metering systems to promote residential storage. If we look specifically at the commercial and industrial segment, which again is behind the meter, there must be a rating system based on flexibility and storage readiness. Looking at market access, commercial and industrial customers can sell stored electricity and participate in the energy market. Very similar to the just discussed energy communities, just at the commercial and industrial level, and for commercial and industrial customers. The second legislative package that we've discussed is the Fit for 55 package. It is a collection of EU legislative proposals aimed at helping the EU and its 27 member states in meeting the 2030 climate target. The package supports the main goals of achieving climate neutrality by 2050, reducing net greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to the 1990 levels. And this is tried to be reached through a huge package of different legislative initiatives. You can see them here on the right side of this slide. Probably there had never been so many different files being proposed in European Union legislation in history. It was definitely unprecedented. Here in the left, we highlight a few of the initiatives that had a direct impact on energy storage. The Energy Taxation Directive, the Renewable Energy Directive, the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure, which was key for vehicle to grid, the gas and hydrogen regulation, key for power to gas to power as it defines renewable and low carbon gases, but also the Energy Efficiency Directive, the Energy Performance of Building Directive, Social Climate Fund that we could have also mentioned, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, Fuel EU, Refuel EU. There's all several initiatives that directly or indirectly had an impact on energy storage. Some, of course, are more relevant, some, of course, were more consequential, but all, or almost all, admittedly, had a key role to play in enlarging the energy storage role in the energy system, in the market. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they were all approved finally, and not all of them are already law. These were proposed in 2021, as said, but for example, the Energy Taxation Directive is a file that is yet to be agreed upon by all the institutions we saw before. This is the first hint at why, even though something is proposed at the European Union level, it doesn't immediately have an impact on the national energy market. It takes time to agree upon a piece of legislation, and then of course it takes time, once it is agreed at the European Union level, to be implemented at the national level. So that's why a file being proposed doesn't mean that there's going to be an immediate impact on the energy market or on the energy storage sector, for example. Moving on to Repower EU, I said this was a file or a proposal, set of proposal elaborated in the context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It was particularly important because it increased renewable energy sources target to 42.5%. This was the result of big negotiations. So this is agreed upon, but also it aimed at expediting permitting for renewables installation, establish renewables go-to areas, and of course all this focus on renewables is paramount and needed for energy storage for this sector, as the deployment of storage goes hand in hand with renewables penetration. There was significant work on files, as you can see, presented in the context of Fit for 55, such as the Renewable Energy Directive, such as the Energy Performance of Building Directive, with new mandate, for example, on solar readiness for new public and commercial building, with more and more strict requirement in being introduced, and maybe in the context of the Energy Efficiency Directive, more reduction of collective energy consumption. So again, an increase of ambitiousness, bold moves with the intent of stop relying on gas imports that in that moment were dominated by high prices and were dominating the news, of course. Moving on, it is also worth discussing the electricity market design revision. From 2024 or 2023, it can be, referred to as the 2023 electricity market design revision, the year when it was presented, or 2024, the year it was approved. The objectives are threefold: so consumer protection, broaden contract options, local renewables energy trading, support for vulnerable customers with regulated pricing and suppliers of last resort. Stability for companies was also another objective, so stable rates via long-term contracts such as power purchase agreements, consistent revenues for renewables through two-way contract for differences, for example. The third objective, increase green electricity through improved predictability of renewable generation, enhanced transparency, and market monitoring. These were the objectives. The how was a very long set of measures that, again, this table on the right lists, but this is just a selection of measures, maybe the ones that are particularly relevant for energy storage. But it was a very long list. Here it's worth mentioning peak shaving products, so a new service that energy storage can provide. It's a product that shall be created in very specific cases, but it's a product, it's a service that nonetheless energy storage can tap into. And the right to energy sharing is also discussed. And tariff methodologies for system operators. It's also a topic that went under scrutiny, particularly important tariffs, grid tariffs for energy storage, of course, in terms of costs. Power purchase agreements was seen as a particularly good way to deploy further renewables, to deploy further energy. Flexibility needs assessment and flexibility needs objectives and flexibility needs schemes were seen as intertwined topics. In a nutshell, we're gonna see it, maybe discuss it a bit later on, but a country needs to assess its needs, assess and set targets based or objective based on this assessment, and if the member states believe there is a need for it, introduce support schemes for flexibility, for non-fossil flexibility, such as storage. Capacity mechanism, which is, of course, an instrument that already exists, are reviewed, are rediscussed. Contract for differences for new generation is discussed. Inframarginal revenue cap goes under scrutiny. So does renewable energy auction schemes that are empowered, are seen as a new option, a new tool for policymakers to accelerate the deployment of green electricity, of green generation. So here we wanted maybe to focus particularly on the topic of flexibility needs assessment that we were just discussing, of flexibility objectives and support schemes. So each member state needs to designate an authority, and this authority shall estimate the needs for flexibility for a period of at least the next 5 to 10 years at the national level. The member states shall define an indicative national objective for non-fossil flexibility, including the respective specific contribution of demand response and energy storage. And based on this national objective and this specific contribution of demand response and energy storage, new flexibility support schemes can be introduced, but they need to be only for non-fossil resources and for new investments. This process of estimating the need for flexibility is gonna take some time, but it's, as you may imagine, particularly important because it can help member states understand what they need, and of course, energy storage may receive more attention in national legislation. So This can be potentially a very important initiative and a very important provision coming from European Union law. Let's move on to how European Union policy is intertwined with member state policy. Let's start with a question. How do we assess whether member states are enshrining energy storage legislation and maybe whether this legislation is in line with EU regulation and directives, but we can also mention decisions. Okay, we can look at the national law, of course, but we can also look at the national energy and climate plans. We can start by looking at the national energy climate plans, which were established under the 2019 Clean Energy Package that we just looked at. And they're meant for member states. Member states should use them to detail how they will meet their 2030 energy and climate targets, which are set by the EU. We can say that they're viewed as roadmaps. They can be used by climate investors looking at the member states to see the commitment of a member state to, they can explain what they see as barriers. They can explain what are the provisions that they aim to introduce in the next few years to meet these 2030 energy and climate targets. And what's the mission and vision, let's say, of a member state in the context of energy and climate. What it's maybe worth highlighting is that in the latest national energy and climate plans, there must be a section on flexibility and energy storage. So the hope is, of course, that in the newest NECPs, more and more focus on energy storage can be identified, can be put by member states, and that the energy storage sector gets more and more attention. Of course, not everything is always perfect. In this picture, you can see a potentially outdated, by the time you see this video, assessment of whether member states address the recommendation coming from the EU regarding energy storage in their national energy climate plan. This recommendation on energy storage were elaborated by the European Commission in 2023, de facto overlap significantly with provision also already existing in clean energy and climate plans. And here the key message is many member states do not look at energy storage barriers, do not yet sufficiently look at solutions that can be introduced. So probably no country does it perfectly, and there is some diversity between how well member states try to solve energy storage issues, but for sure there is no perfect plan on how to address energy storage barriers at this moment. So there is still a long way to go. We feel like each time we see national energy and climate plans, there are improvements. There is more attention to energy storage. There is a better understanding of how to support the sector and how to reach the 2030 targets. But again, still a long way to go. Of course, these NECPs show what the member state plan to do. But what about what the member state can already do? If we look at national law, if we look at the European Union law, and today we discussed quite a few initiatives, but we should not forget that there are many more that we didn't have the time to touch upon, especially in the context of COVID recovery, so state aid, for example. Well, the member states have a lot of options at their disposal to strengthen, support the energy storage sector. Of course, they can remove barriers. They can improve the legal framework. They can focus on implementing into national law what is decided at the European Union. But they can also decide to introduce or reform a capacity mechanism. They can introduce national objectives, regardless of what is being done at the European Union level, or introduce new strategies. At the European Union level, there is no energy storage objective and there is no energy storage strategy. While at the national level, for example, in Italy, we do have that. And they can also introduce support scheme, and these would be a state aid measures that will need to be in line with European Union law, but it's definitely something that we've seen happening more and more in the past few years. More and more member states have decided to introduce a wide array of support schemes. There can be also very diverse. These support schemes can be content for differences, for example, but yeah, different types of investment need. But they can also be auctions. They can be energy storage specific auctions, or they can be, for example, tenders to support co-location, storage with renewables, but in reality also storage on its own. So here the main message is there is a lot of activity and a lot of dynamicity at the member state level, because the member state have the possibility and have the duty, of course, to implement European Union law, but they've also been empowered through the national and through the European law in introducing new initiatives, new options to support the energy storage sector. So this means that in reality, we may have different member states doing very different things to support energy storage. It's already a bit the case now, but as time passes, as maybe we will see more diversity.
In a nutshell, what we can see and what we can conclude is that policy trends suggest that in the next few years, many European markets will develop, especially after 2026. While at the moment, some national energy storage markets are almost inexistent due to an unsatisfactory legal framework, such the lack of recognition or definition of energy storage, and also the late implementation of EU law, will have to change due to the EU legal obligations that are set to member states. The more mature markets will also accelerate their deployment rates by relying on different support or adequacy instruments. Last but not least, drivers and business case will differ significantly from member state to member state as policy approaches will become more and more different from country to country. And now I give the floor to Jacopo to give some final words.
So we hope this course was useful to you in understanding the basics of European Union and national policy making in the context of energy storage. Do not hesitate to contact us, to contact Stories, officers, and myself in case you have any questions on the topic. Thank you again for joining, and see you soon.